The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it, drifting lazily between the massive pillars that held the structure together. Representatives from 947 species filled the countless seats that curved around the central speaking platform. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where the future of trillions of lives was decided. This was where humanity had been coming for 847 years, hoping that someday they would be treated as equals. Today was different. The council members could feel it in the air, though none of them understood why. There was a strange energy in the chamber, a tension that had no obvious source. The human delegation had requested an emergency session, which was unusual. Humans rarely requested anything. They had learned long ago that their requests were almost always denied. High Counselor Vreth of the Dominion sat in the elevated chair, reserved for the rotating leadership of the council. His scaled skin shifted colors as his mood changed, currently showing the pale blue of mild annoyance. The humans had interrupted a perfectly good session about trade regulations to make some kind of announcement. Whatever it was, Vreth was certain it would be another complaint about their treatment, another plea for voting rights, another request that the council had heard 1,000 times before. The human ambassador walked to the central platform. Her name was Chen Wei, and she had served in this role for 30 years. She was old now, her hair white and her steps slow, but her eyes remained sharp. Those eyes had watched the council reject human proposals for 3 decades. Those eyes had seen colleagues laughed at, human achievements dismissed, human suffering ignored. Today, those eyes held something new. They held peace. Chen Wei activated the translation systems and waited for the chamber to fall silent. It took longer than usual. Many species were still talking among themselves, barely paying attention to the human ambassador. This was normal. Humans were considered a minor species, useful for certain tasks, but ultimately unimportant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Distinguished members of the Galactic Council, Chen Wei began, her voice steady and calm. I come before you today not to make a request. I come before you today not to file a complaint. I come before you today to deliver a message from the United Human Government and every human colony world across this galaxy. Something in her tone made the chamber grow quieter. Even the Velthri delegation, who openly despised humanity, stopped their side conversations to listen. For 847 years, humanity has been part of this council. We joined with hope in our hearts. We believed that among the stars, we would find wisdom and fellowship. We believed that the great civilizations of the galaxy would welcome us as brothers and sisters. We believed that our differences would make us stronger together. Chen Wei paused, and for a moment, her composure cracked. A deep sadness crossed her face before she continued. We were wrong. Whispers spread through the chamber. High Counselor Vreth leaned forward, his scales shifting to yellow, indicating curiosity. In our first century among you, we offered our medical knowledge freely. Human doctors traveled to plague-stricken worlds and saved millions of lives. We asked for nothing in return except friendship. The council responded by placing restrictions on human travel, claiming we might spread diseases of our own. Chen Wei's voice remained steady, but her words carried weight that pressed down on the assembled representatives. In our second century, we shared our art and music and stories. We believed that culture could bridge the gap between species. The council responded by banning human cultural products from 47 worlds, claiming they were corrupting influences on younger species. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were old decisions, made by representatives long dead, but the consequences had never been discussed so openly. In our third century, we offered our engineers to help build the great network that connects your worlds. Human hands helped construct the very stations that power galactic commerce. The council responded by refusing to allow human ships to use the network. Without paying triple the standard fees, the Corvan delegation lowered their eyes. Their species had benefited enormously from human engineering. They had also voted for the fee increase. Century after century, we gave. Century after century, we were rejected. We fought in your wars when you asked. We died defending worlds that would not even allow humans to land. We negotiated peace between species that had warred for millennia. Yet we were never granted a vote in this chamber. We were observers. We were servants. We were never equals. High Counselor Vreth raised a clawed hand. Ambassador Chen, if this is another petition for voting rights, I must remind you that the matter was settled in the last session. The Council has determined that humanity has not yet demonstrated the maturity required for full membership. Chen Wei smiled, and that smile sent a chill through several of the older Council members who knew her well. It was not a smile of bitterness or anger. It was a smile of release. It was the smile of someone putting down a burden they had carried for far too long. No, High Counselor, this is not a petition. We are done with petitions. We are done with requests. We are done with hope. She straightened her shoulders and spoke the words that would echo through galactic history. The United Human Government, speaking for all humanity, hereby announces our complete and permanent withdrawal from the Galactic Council and from the Milky Way galaxy itself. Effective immediately, all human worlds will cease communication with Council space. Within one standard day, every human ship, station, and colony will be gone. We are leaving. Silence. Complete and total silence fell over the chamber. Nearly 1,000 species sat frozen, unable to process what they had just heard. Leaving the galaxy was impossible. No species had ever done it. No species had the technology to do it. The Velthri ambassador was the first to recover. He rose to his full height, his crystalline body catching the light as he laughed. Impossible. The humans are bluffing. They seek to manipulate us with threats they cannot carry out. Intergalactic travel is a fantasy. Others joined in the laughter. Of course the humans were lying. They always exaggerated their capabilities. This was just another desperate bid for attention. Chen Wei waited for the laughter to die down. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost gentle, like a mother explaining something to a child who refused to understand. We have been preparing for this day for 300 years. We had hoped, always hoped, that things would change, that someday this council would see us as we truly are. But hope has limits, and ours has finally run out. She touched a control on her wrist, and a holographic display appeared above the speaking platform. It showed a map of the galaxy, with all human-occupied worlds highlighted in blue. As the council watched, those blue dots began to blink, one by one, then faster, then all at once, and then they went dark. The evacuation is already complete, Chen Wei said. As of this moment, there is not a single human remaining in council space. Our colonies are empty. Our stations are abandoned. Our ships are beyond your reach. We are gone. Panic erupted in the chamber. Representatives shouted at each other, at Chen Wei, at their own aides. Sensors were checked and rechecked. Emergency communications were sent to human worlds across the galaxy. Every single one came back with the same result, no response. The humans had vanished. High Counselor Vreth slammed his fist against his chair, demanding order. This is a trick, some kind of cloaking technology. The humans cannot have simply disappeared. We did not disappear, Chen Wei replied, and the sadness in her voice was deeper now. We left. There is a difference. We spent centuries being invisible in this chamber, our voices unheard, our contributions unacknowledged. Now we have chosen to be truly gone, and suddenly you notice our absence. She began walking toward the exit, her steps slow and deliberate. The chamber had fallen silent again, the representatives too shocked to speak. Where will you go? Someone called out. It was a young delegate from a species Chen Wei did not recognize, one of the newer members of the council. His voice trembled with something that might have been genuine concern. Chen Wei stopped and turned back to face the assembly one final time. We have found another galaxy, a place where we can build something new, something better, a place where we will never again have to beg for respect. We have already earned 1,000 times over, but the journey, another voice called out. It would take millions of years. Not with our technology, Chen Wei said simply. We have capabilities you never bothered to learn about because you assumed. We had nothing to teach you. You saw our kindness as weakness. You saw our patience as proof that we could be safely ignored. You were wrong about so many things. She reached the door and paused with her hand on the frame. We left detailed records of our contributions to galactic society in the archives. Someday, perhaps, someone will read them. They will learn how many plagues we cured, how many wars we ended, how many disasters we quietly prevented. They will learn what you had and what you threw away. And perhaps they will understand why we could no longer stay. The doors opened, and Chen Wei walked. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the galaxy, and the cracks were beginning to show in everything. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, the markets that had once hummed with activity now sat half empty. Merchants from a dozen species gathered in small groups, speaking in worried voices about shortages and delays and contracts that could no longer be fulfilled. The great bazaars that had drawn buyers from across the galaxy were growing quieter with each passing month. Something fundamental had broken in the machinery of galactic commerce, and no one seemed able to fix it. Merchant Grell of the Tortian Combine stood before his empty warehouse, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. He had been one of the most successful traders in this sector, moving goods between 100 worlds with perfect efficiency. Now his ships sat idle in dock, and his accounts showed nothing but losses. "I do not understand," he said to his partner, a young Tortian named Vale who had joined the business only 2 years before humanity left. "We never traded directly with humans. How can their absence affect us so greatly?" Vale pulled up a holographic display showing their supply chains. Red lines crisscrossed the image, each one representing a broken connection. "The Veltheni bought our products," she explained. "They paid in crystal credits, which we used to purchase raw materials from the Corvani. But the Veltheni economy has collapsed. They cannot buy anything anymore. What do the Veltheni have to do with humans? Everything, it turns out." Vale zoomed in on the display, showing the economic relationships that had been invisible to most species. Humans were the only ones who bought Veltheni crystals in large quantities. They found uses for them that no other species understood. When the humans left, the crystal trade died overnight. The Veltheni depended on that trade for 70% of their economy. Now they have nothing. Grell stared at the display, watching the cascade of failures spread across the map. The Veltheni collapse had triggered problems in 12 other economies, which had triggered problems in dozens more. It was like watching a disease spread through a body, slowly killing everything it touched. "How did we not see this coming?" he asked. "How did the Council not see this coming?" Vale did not have an answer. No one did. On the frontier world of Hesperus IV, the situation was far worse. The colony had been established 300 years ago on a harsh world with thin atmosphere and dangerous native life. It had survived and eventually thrived because of the medical station that humans had built in orbit. Human doctors had developed treatments for the native toxins that killed colonists. Human engineers had designed the atmospheric processors that made the air breathable. Human teachers had trained local doctors to continue the work. Now the medical station was empty. The human doctors were gone, and a plague was spreading through the colony. Governor Thiessen stood in the emergency command center, watching the death toll climb higher with each passing hour. The plague was caused by a mutated form of native bacteria, something that the human doctors had predicted might happen decades ago. They had left behind treatment protocols, but the local medical staff could not understand half of the terminology. Human medicine was far more advanced than anyone had realized, and without humans to interpret their own research, the knowledge was useless. "How many dead?" Thiessen asked, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 47,000 as of this morning, her aide replied. "The hospitals are overwhelmed. We have sent requests for aid to the Council, but their medical ships are all committed elsewhere. There are outbreaks on 6 other worlds." Thiessen closed her eyes. She remembered the human doctors who had served on this world when she was young. Dr. Martinez had treated her own family when the toxin fever struck. He had stayed by her mother's bedside for 3 days, never sleeping, never giving up. He had saved her mother's life with medicine that seemed like magic. She had never thanked him properly. She had never thanked any of them. Like most people in the galaxy, she had simply assumed that humans would always be there when needed, always ready to help, always willing to give. "What about the human archives?" she asked. "The medical databases they left behind?" "We have teams working on them," her aide said. "But the encryption is beyond our capabilities." The humans did not lock us out deliberately. They simply used security systems that we cannot break. Their technology was generations ahead of ours. We never knew. The death toll climbed to 48,000 while they spoke. Far across the galaxy, on the beautiful water world of Serenus, a different kind of crisis was unfolding. Serenus was known throughout Council space as a world of peace, a place where species that had been at war for generations came to negotiate and heal. The great floating cities of Serenus had hosted more peace conferences than any other world. Treaties signed in its crystal chambers had ended conflicts that had lasted millennia. But Serenus had a secret. The peace that it offered was not entirely natural. The world's atmosphere contained subtle chemical compounds that promoted calm and reduced aggression. These compounds had been engineered by human scientists 3 centuries ago, working in partnership with the native Serenians to create a true haven of peace. Without human maintenance, the atmospheric processors were beginning to fail. The compounds were dispersing, and on Serenus, for the first time in 300 years, violence was beginning to return. Ambassador Krell of the Dominion had come to Serenus to negotiate an end to a border dispute with the Tholani Federation. Such disputes had been resolved peacefully for generations. Both sides would present their cases, the calming influence of the world would smooth tempers, and a fair compromise would be reached. It had worked countless times before. It was not working now. Krell found himself growing angry during the negotiations in ways he had never experienced. Small slights that he would have ignored a year ago now filled him with rage. The Tholani ambassador's tone seemed insulting. His proposals seemed deliberately unfair. Krell caught himself planning hostile responses, imagining violent solutions, thinking thoughts that belonged to his warrior ancestors rather than a modern diplomat. He excused himself from the chamber and walked to the observation deck, staring out at the endless ocean. His hands were trembling. His hearts were pounding. Something was very wrong. "You feel it too," a voice said behind him. Krell turned to find a Serenian floating nearby, her translucent body rippling with concern. "The peace is fading. The balance we maintained is broken. What is happening?" Krell demanded. "What did you do?" "We did nothing. The humans did everything." The Serenian's voice was filled with sorrow. "They built the systems that gave our world its gift. They maintained those systems for 3 centuries. They offered to train us to continue the work, but we refused. We were proud. We believed our natural gifts were enough. We were wrong." Krell thought about all the treaties signed on this world, all the wars that had ended here, all the lives saved because enemies had been able to sit down together and talk instead of fight. The humans had made that possible. They had worked quietly in the background, never taking credit, never asking for recognition. And now they were gone, and peace was dying with them. "How long?" he asked. "A few years, perhaps. The compounds will disperse entirely. Serenus will become just another world. The peace conferences will fail. Wars that were avoided will begin. Millions will die." Krell returned to the negotiation chamber, but he could not focus on the border dispute anymore. He was thinking about humanity, about all the ways they had shaped galactic civilization without anyone noticing. He was thinking about how easily they had been dismissed, how carelessly they had been insulted, how completely they had been taken for granted. He was thinking about what the galaxy had lost. On the Council homeworld of Axiom Prime, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The High Council had commissioned a study to determine the full extent of humanity's contribution to galactic society. The report had taken 2 years to complete. When it was finally delivered, 3 council members resigned in shame. The numbers were devastating. Humans had comprised 40% of all frontier medical personnel. Human engineers had designed or improved 60% of all life support systems in use across the galaxy. Human diplomats had successfully mediated for 112 interspecies conflicts. Human teachers had trained doctors, engineers, and scientists on 900 worlds. But the most shocking discoveries were the secret ones. Deep in classified archives, investigators found records of human activities that had never been made public. 300 years ago, a rogue asteroid had been heading toward the Axiom system. Human ships had intercepted it and quietly redirected it into empty space. The Council had never been informed. The official records showed the asteroid as a natural miss. 200 years ago, a civil war in the Corvan systems had threatened to spread across the sector. Human agents had worked behind the scenes to bring the factions together, never revealing their involvement. The peace that followed was credited to Corvan wisdom and maturity. 100 years ago, a dying star had threatened to go supernova and destroy a dozen inhabited worlds. Human scientists had stabilized it using technology the Council did not even know existed. Billions of lives had been saved. No one had ever thanked 15 years after humanity's departure. The research vessel Seeker of Truth drifted through the darkness at the edge of the galaxy. Its crew of scientists and explorers had been following humanity's trail for 3 years, tracking the path they had taken into the void. What they found at the end of that trail would change everything the galaxy believed about the species they had driven away. Captain Voss of the Thalani Federation stood on the observation deck, staring at the impossible sight before him. His scales had gone pale, a sign of deep shock among his people. Behind him, his crew was equally silent, equally stunned. None of them had words for what they were seeing. The darkness between galaxies should have been empty. It should have been nothing but void and silence, an ocean of nothing stretching for millions of light years. Instead, there was light, a ribbon of pure energy stretched from the edge of the Milky Way toward the distant glow of Andromeda, a bridge of folded space that should not have existed. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely beyond anything the galaxy's best scientists had imagined possible. That is not natural, Science Officer Trell whispered, stating what everyone already knew. No natural phenomenon could create something like that. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of 1,000 stars. Captain Voss nodded slowly. It is not natural. It is human. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Humans had built a highway between galaxies. They had done something that the greatest minds of the Council had declared impossible. They had done it in secret, while the galaxy mocked them and dismissed them and refused to grant them a vote in their own future. Continue the survey, Voss ordered, his voice steady despite his racing hearts. Document everything. The Council needs to see this. The Seeker of Truth moved along the edge of the bridge, its sensors recording every detail. The structure was not solid in any physical sense. It was a manipulation of space itself, a corridor of altered physics that allowed travel at speeds that defied all known laws. Ships using this bridge could cross the void between galaxies in years instead of millennia. But the bridge was not the only discovery. As the crew explored the region where the bridge began, they found other evidence of human activity. An asteroid belt that should have contained billions of tons of raw materials was completely empty, harvested down to the last pebble. 3 stars that ancient records showed as dying had been somehow stabilized, their nuclear fires burning steadily where they should have been flickering toward death. And most disturbing of all, there was a gap in space where a black hole should have been. Check the coordinates again, Captain Voss demanded when his science officer reported the finding. Black holes do not simply disappear. The coordinates are correct, Captain. According to our records, there was a stellar mass black hole here 30 years ago. It threatened the shipping lanes to 12 colony worlds. The Council was planning an expensive decades-long project to reroute all traffic around it. Trell's voice trembled as she continued. The project was never completed because the threat simply vanished. The official explanation was a sensor error in the original surveys. It was not a sensor error. No, Captain. The humans removed it. They removed an entire black hole, and they did it so quietly that no one ever knew. Voss sat down heavily in his command chair. He had served in the fleet for 60 years. He had seen wonders beyond counting, traveled to worlds that most beings would never visit, witnessed the power of the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. And now he was learning that humanity, the species that everyone had dismissed as primitive and unimportant, possessed technology that made everything else look like children's toys. Why did they hide this? He asked no one in particular. With power like this, they could have conquered the galaxy. They could have forced the Council to treat them with respect. Why did they stay quiet? His communications officer, a young Serenian named Izza, spoke up. Perhaps they did not want to conquer anything. Perhaps they only wanted to be accepted for who they were, not feared for what they could do. The words struck Voss like a physical blow. He thought about his own species' history, about the wars they had fought before joining the Council, about the enemies they had destroyed and the territories they had claimed. Power had always meant domination. Strength had always meant conquest. That was the way of the galaxy, the fundamental truth that everyone understood. But humans had not seen the world that way. They had possessed the power to rule everything, and they had chosen instead to help. They had hidden their strength and offered their kindness, hoping that someday the galaxy would accept them for their character rather than their capabilities. And the galaxy had responded by treating them like servants. "We failed them," Voss said quietly. "We failed them in every way possible, far away on Axiom Prime." The Council was reviewing a different kind of evidence. Investigators had been digging through human archives for 15 years, slowly decoding the records they had left behind. What they found painted a picture that made the Council's treatment of humanity look even worse than anyone had imagined. Counselor Mira, now a senior member of the body, presented the findings to an emergency session. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she activated the holographic displays. "The evidence is overwhelming," she began. "For centuries, humans intervened in galactic affairs in ways that we never knew about and never acknowledged. They saved lives beyond counting. They prevented wars that would have killed billions. They protected species that had never shown them anything but contempt." The displays showed a timeline of human interventions. Each event was marked with estimates of lives saved and disasters prevented. The numbers climbed into the trillions. "Why did they hide this from us?" demanded High Counselor Thies, who had taken the position after Vreth died of shame 2 years earlier. If they wanted respect, why not reveal their power? Mira had spent years thinking about that question. She believed she finally understood the answer. They did not want respect that came from fear. They wanted to be valued for who they were, not for what they could do. They hoped that if they helped us enough, we would eventually see their worth without needing to know about their power. "That is foolish." Thies scoffed. "Power is the only language the galaxy understands." "Perhaps that is the problem," Mira replied. "Perhaps that is exactly why they left. They refused to speak our language, and we refused to learn theirs." The chamber fell silent. Mira continued her presentation, showing documents that detailed human philosophy and values. The concepts were strange to most Council species. Humans believed in helping others without expectation of reward. They believed in restraint, in using power only when absolutely necessary. They believed that the measure of a civilization was how it treated those weaker than itself. By that measure, the galaxy had proven itself barbaric. "There's more," Mira said, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "We have decoded some of their scientific archives. What we found suggests that humans had the capability to leave the galaxy. For at least 300 years. They stayed because they hoped things would change. They stayed because they believed in us. 300 years? Thies repeated in disbelief. They endured our treatment for 300 years when they could have left at any time. Yes, they kept hoping. They kept giving us chances. Until finally, they ran out of hope. The weight of that statement pressed down on everyone in the chamber. 300 years of patience. 300 years of kindness returned with cruelty. 300 years of believing that the galaxy would eventually do the right thing. The galaxy had proven that belief wrong. In the months that followed, the discoveries kept coming. Research teams found evidence of human activity throughout the galaxy. Interventions that had been so subtle that no one had ever noticed. Plagues that had mysteriously stopped spreading. Natural disasters that had been slightly less devastating than they should have been. Conflicts that had ended just before they could escalate into full-scale wars. The humans had been guardian angels, watching over a galaxy that despised them. And now they were gone. And the galaxy was learning just how much it had depended on their quiet protection. On the frontier, things were getting worse. Without human engineers to maintain the deep space infrastructure, stations were failing. Without human doctors to develop new treatments, diseases were spreading. Without human diplomats to smooth tensions, old conflicts were reigniting. The Velthari hegemony had collapsed entirely, its worlds scattered and broken. The Corvan systems were locked in civil war. The peace of Serenus was gone, and the conferences that met there now ended in shouting matches rather than treaties. Everything the humans had built, everything they had maintained, everything they had protected was falling apart. Captain Voss and the Seeker of Truth returned home after 4 years of exploration. They brought with them a complete record of what they had found at the edge of the galaxy. They brought evidence of human power beyond imagining. They BR. 30 years after humanity walked away from the Milky Way, the galaxy that had driven them away was falling apart. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council, once filled with representatives from nearly 1,000 species, now echoed with empty seats. 17 species had withdrawn from the council entirely. 40 more had reduced their participation to token observers, unwilling to be part of an institution that had proven so catastrophically wrong. The remaining members gathered not to debate trade regulations or territorial disputes, but to discuss survival. High Counselor Mira, who had risen to lead the council 10 years earlier, stood at the speaking platform and looked out at the diminished assembly. She remembered when this chamber had seemed too small for galactic ambition. Now it felt too large for galactic shame. "The motion before us is unprecedented," she began. "We are proposing to send a diplomatic fleet across the intergalactic bridge to find humanity and ask them to return. This is not a request we make lightly. Many of you believe it is foolish, that the humans will reject us as we rejected them. Others believe it is necessary, that without human help, our civilization will not survive another century." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "I believe it is neither foolish nor strictly necessary. I believe it is simply right. We wronged humanity for 800 years. We must at least attempt to apologize." The debate that followed was fierce and painful. Representatives who had been born after humanity's departure argued passionately for the mission. They had grown up in a galaxy that was slowly dying, and they knew exactly who was responsible. They did not share their elders' pride. They could not afford it. Representatives who remembered the old days, who had personally voted against human rights and human dignity, were more reluctant. Some had spent 3 decades constructing elaborate justifications for how they had treated humanity. Admitting they were wrong would destroy everything they believed about themselves. But in the end, the vote was overwhelming. The diplomatic fleet would be assembled. The journey would be made. The galaxy would humble itself before the species it had spent centuries humiliating. 6 months later, the fleet departed from the edge of council space. 15 ships from 12 species, carrying diplomats and scientists and ordinary citizens who simply wanted to see what humanity had become. They entered the bridge of light that humans had built, and they began the journey across the void. The crossing took 3 years. During that time, the travelers had nothing to do but think about what they would say when they arrived. How did you apologize for 800 years of cruelty? What words could possibly bridge the gap that the galaxy had created? Some of the diplomats wrote speeches and discarded them, then wrote new ones that were equally inadequate. Some gave up on words entirely and simply hoped that their presence would be enough. Captain Trell, a descendant of the science officer who had served on the Seeker of Truth, commanded the lead ship. She had studied everything known about humanity, every scrap of information recovered from their abandoned worlds, every word of the message they had left behind. She did not know what to expect when they reached Andromeda. She only knew that whatever they found would change the galaxy forever. When the fleet finally emerged from the bridge, they found themselves at the edge of a stellar nursery, a vast cloud of gas and dust where new stars were being born. The sensors showed something impossible. The birth rate of stars in this region was 10 times higher than natural processes should allow. Humans were not just living in Andromeda, they were reshaping it. "Begin scanning for signs of human presence," Captain Trell ordered, her voice steady despite her wonder. "They must know we are here. They built the bridge. They would have sensors monitoring it." The scan results were overwhelming. Human signatures were everywhere. Terraformed worlds dotted the stellar nursery like pearls in a cosmic web. Massive structures orbited artificial stars. Ships that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built moved between installations with casual grace. In 30 years, humanity had built a civilization that made the Milky Way look primitive. And yet, there was no response to the fleet's arrival. No challenge, no welcome, no acknowledgement at all. The human ships continued their activities as if the Council fleet did not exist. "They are ignoring us," observed Ambassador Krell, grandson of the diplomat who had once negotiated on Serenus. "Can you blame them? Perhaps they simply have not noticed us," someone suggested hopefully. "They moved black holes and stabilized dying stars while we thought they were primitives," Captain Trell replied. "They noticed us the moment we entered the bridge. They are choosing not to respond." The fleet pressed deeper into human space, following the signals toward what appeared to be a central world. Along the way, they passed wonders beyond counting. A ring of habitats encircled an artificial star, home to billions of humans living in environments tailored to their every need. A fleet of ships was carefully dismantling an asteroid, processing its materials with technology that seemed like magic. A garden world hung in space like a jewel, its atmosphere perfectly balanced, its oceans teeming with life from 100 different planets. "They are not just surviving here," Ambassador Krell said softly. "They are thriving. They are building paradise." After weeks of travel, the fleet reached their destination. It was a world that orbited a star which should not exist. Analysis showed that the star had been artificially created, ignited from raw materials gathered across light years, designed specifically to provide perfect conditions for the world that circled it. They had named the world New Terra, and it was the most beautiful thing any of the travelers had ever seen. As they approached, a signal finally came. A single ship detached from the planet's orbital stations and moved to intercept them. It was small compared to the massive vessels they had seen elsewhere, designed for diplomacy rather than war. The Council fleet came to a halt and waited. The human ship matched velocities and opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on the screens was old but kind, a woman with white hair and gentle eyes. She wore no uniform, carried no weapons, displayed no symbols of rank or authority. She simply smiled at the assembled representatives of a galaxy that had once treated her people as servants. "Welcome to New Terra," she said. "We have been expecting you. My name is Sarah Chen. My grandmother was Ambassador Chenwei, who spoke your council's last words to humanity 30 years ago. I have been asked to receive you on behalf of our people." Captain Trell stepped forward, her prepared speech suddenly seeming completely inadequate. "We come seeking forgiveness," she said simply. "We come to apologize for everything our galaxy did to your people. We come to ask you to return." Sarah Chen's smile did not waver, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that was difficult to read. "You have traveled very far to say those words. Please, come to the surface. There's much to discuss." The diplomatic party was transported to New Terra's capital, a city that seemed to grow organically from the landscape rather than being built upon it. Towers of crystal and living wood rose toward the sky. Gardens filled every available space. Water flowed through channels that served as both transportation and art. Everything was beautiful. Everything was peaceful. And everything was distinctly, unmistakably human. They were led to a great hall, not unlike the council chamber they had left behind, but filled with light and growing things instead of cold stone and ancient protocol. Humans of all ages filled the seats, watching the alien visitors with curiosity rather than hostility. There was no anger in their faces. That was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. A council of humans rose to receive them. Elder men and women who represented the various communities that had grown in Andromeda over the past 3 decades. Sarah Chen took her place among them and gestured for the galactic diplomats to speak. Ambassador Krell stepped forward. He had rehearsed this moment countless times during the long journey. Now the words came not from his prepared speech, but from somewhere deeper. "For 800 years, my people and the other species of the Milky Way treated humanity with contempt. We denied you representation. We restricted your movement. We dismissed your contributions. We took everything you offered and gave nothing but insults in return. When you finally left, we realized too late what we had lost. We have spent 30 years watching our civilization crumble without you. We have come not to demand your return, not to negotiate terms, but simply to say that we are sorry. We were wrong. We are ashamed, and we understand if you never wish to see us again." The Human Council listened in silence. When Krell finished, they conferred among themselves in low voices. Finally, Sarah Chen rose to respond. 30 years ago, when we left, many of us were angry. Many wanted to watch the galaxy burn, to let those who had hurt us suffer the consequences of their cruelty. But we chose differently. We chose to build rather than to hate. We chose to hope rather than to despair. We chose to become something better than what was done to us. She stepped down from the platform and walked among the alien diplomats, looking into each of their faces with compassion that they did not deserve. You ask us to return. We cannot do that. The Milky Way was never truly our home. We were guests who were never made welcome. But we will not abandon you entirely. We Wolf diplomatic fleet returned to the Milky Way after 7 years of travel, carrying stories that seemed impossible and gifts beyond measure. When Captain Trell and Ambassador Krell presented their findings to the Galactic Council, the chamber fell silent with a wonder that had not been felt in those halls for generations. Humanity had forgiven them. Humanity had offered them knowledge and hope. Humanity had opened the door to a future that the galaxy had never dared to imagine. High Counselor Mira listened to the report with tears streaming down her face. She had spent her entire career trying to fix the damage that her predecessors had caused. She had never believed that she would live to see this moment. They gave us everything, Ambassador Krell concluded. The plans for the bridge technology, medical knowledge that will cure diseases we thought incurable, agricultural techniques that will end famine on 100 worlds. They gave freely, asking nothing in return except that we try to become better than we were. Why? Demanded Counselor Thies, who had never been able to believe in human generosity. There must be conditions. There must be hidden demands. No species gives away power without expecting something in return. Captain Trell stepped forward, her expression patient but firm. I asked the same question. Sarah Chen answered me with a human concept that I have been thinking about for 7 years. She called it paying it forward. The idea is that when someone helps you, instead of paying them back, you help someone else. The kindness spreads outward forever, touching lives that the original giver will never know. She paused, letting the concept settle over the assembly. Humans do not see power the way we do. They do not see kindness as weakness. They believe that the measure of a civilization is not how much it can take, but how much it can give. They have been living by that belief for 1,000 years. It is why they helped us even when we hurt them. It is why they forgive us even now. The debate that followed lasted for months. Some species immediately began preparing to use the bridge technology to join humanity in Andromeda. They had seen what the Milky Way was becoming, and they wanted no part of it. Others dedicated themselves to rebuilding, using the knowledge humanity had provided to repair the damage that decades of neglect had caused. But the most important change was not technological. It was philosophical. A movement that had begun decades earlier, the followers of the human path, grew from a fringe group into a major political force. They studied human values and tried to apply them to galactic society. They advocated for helping weaker species instead of exploiting them. They argued for forgiveness instead of vengeance, cooperation instead of competition, kindness instead of cruelty. For the first time in galactic history, species began to treat each other as partners rather than rivals. The old ways died hard, and there were setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed like nothing would ever truly change. But slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to grow. 50 years after humanity's departure, the Milky Way was a different place. The Galactic Council had been reformed from the ground up, with voting rights for all member species regardless of size or power. The old hierarchies that had placed some species above others had been dismantled. The philosophy that had driven humanity away had been recognized as the poison it always was. On the anniversary of humanity's departure, a ceremony was held in the Great Hall where Chen Wei had delivered her final message. Representatives from every species in the galaxy gathered to pay tribute to the lessons humanity had taught them. They read the words that the humans had left at the entrance to the bridge, the message of hope and forgiveness that had changed everything. And then they made a promise. We will become worthy of their faith in us, High Counselor Voss declared, a descendant of the captain who had first discovered humanity's true power. We will build a civilization that helps instead of hurts, that gives instead of takes. that loves instead of hates. We will prove that their hope was not wasted. And someday, when we have truly changed, we will cross the bridge and thank them in person." The assembly rose and spoke the words together, a vow that echoed through the chamber and out into the galaxy beyond. "We will become worthy." Across the void, on the world called New Terra, a woman named Sarah Chen sat in her garden and watched the sunset over an ocean that sparkled with colors that did not exist in nature. She was very old now, past the age when her grandmother had addressed the council for the final time. But her eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still clear, and she still remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about a galaxy that had never understood what it had. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Sarah activated the display and saw a message from the monitoring stations at the edge of the bridge. Ships were coming, not diplomatic vessels like the First Fleet that had arrived decades ago, but cargo ships and colony transports, carrying millions of beings from dozens of species. The galaxy was finally coming home. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the artificial sun wash over her face. Her grandmother had never lived to see this day. The generation that had endured the worst of the galaxy's cruelty had passed into history, their pain finally given meaning by what came after. But their hope had survived. Their love had survived. Their belief that even those who hurt them could become something better had survived. And now that belief was being proven true. The first ships crossed the bridge and emerged into Andromeda's light. Humans were there to meet them, not with weapons or demands, but with open arms and warm smiles. The refugees from a dying way of life were welcomed into a new one, where the old hatreds meant nothing and the future was limited only by imagination. Among the new rivals was a young Thespian named Kira, great-granddaughter of Counselor Mira, who had led the fight to reform the galaxy. She had grown up on stories of humanity, studying their philosophy in school, learning their languages, dreaming of the day when she could see their wonders with her own eyes. As she stepped off her ship onto New Terra's soil, a human child ran up to her, offering a flower that glowed with soft bioluminescence. The child smiled and said something in a human language that Kira's translator rendered as, "Welcome to your new home." Kira knelt down and accepted the flower, her eyes filling with tears. Her ancestors had treated these people as servants. Her ancestors had denied them basic dignity. Her ancestors had driven them from their own galaxy with centuries of cruelty and contempt. And now their descendants were giving her flowers and welcoming her home. "Why?" she asked, echoing the question that had been asked so many times over so many years. "After everything, why are you so kind?" The child tilted her head, confused by the question. Why would we be anything else? And in that simple response, Kira understood everything. The humans were not kind because they expected anything in return. They were not forgiving because they had forgotten what was done to them. They were not generous because it served some hidden purpose. They were all of these things because that was simply who they were. It was the choice they had made long ago about the kind of people they wanted to be. It was the light they had carried through 800 years of darkness, the flame they had protected even when the galaxy tried to extinguish it. It was the gift they gave to everyone they met, the lesson they taught to everyone who would listen, that power was nothing compared to kindness, that strength was nothing compared to love, and that the true measure of any being was not what they could destroy, but what they could create. Kira stood and looked around at the world the humans had built. She saw the crystal towers and the living gardens, the artificial stars and the engineered ecosystems, the wonders beyond counting that stretched toward every horizon. She saw humans and aliens walking together, laughing together, building together. She saw the future, and she understood, finally, what the galaxy had lost when humanity walked away. It was not their technology. It was not their power. It was not their intelligence or their resources or their military might. It was their light, the simple, profound, inextinguishable light that burned in their hearts and guided everything they did. The light that said every life had value. The light that said kindness was strength. The light that said the universe could be made better, one small act of love at a time. The galaxy had tried to extinguish that light. It had failed, and now the light was spreading, reaching across the void to touch worlds that had once been lost in darkness. Sarah Chen passed away peacefully 3 days after the great rival, surrounded by family and friends, knowing that her grandmother's hope had not been in vain. Her last words were a quote from an ancient human poem, something about not going gentle and raging against the dying of the light. But for humanity, there was no dying of the light. There was only its endless, patient spread across the universe, warming everything it touched, transforming everything it reached. The galaxy that had driven them away was learning to carry that light now. It would take time. It would take generations. But the journey had begun, and it would not be stopped. Somewhere in the void between galaxies, the bridge of